Welcome to the Connection Audit. Hello and welcome to the Connection Audit. I'm Kirsten,
And I'm Blake.
where we take a clear-eyed look at modern relationships. What's changed, what's broken, and what actually helps people connect with respect. We'll explore ethical non-monogamy, or ENM for short. Without the noise, we'll look at topics such as consent, boundaries, communication, and the emotional skills most of us were never taught.
And we'll share how the Blossom Society is building a safer, women are sovereign space where education comes before access. If you're done with chaos and ready for clarity, you're in the right place.
So to kick things off today, I think we really need to just look at the water we are all swimming in.
Yeah, exactly. The whole cultural ecosystem.
Right. Because whether you are actively dating right now, or maybe you're deeply embedded in a 30-year marriage, or you're exploring entirely non-traditional relationship structures, we all exist in this exact same ecosystem.
We do. And right now, that ecosystem is producing this unprecedented level of absolute bone-deep fatigue.
It really is. It's exhausting. And when we begin by auditing this culture, the most glaring contradiction is that we are technically living in the most technologically connected era in human history.
Right.
But at the same time, people are reporting record levels of profound isolation.
It's the great irony of our time, really. I mean,
Yeah.
we have these digital platforms that literally market themselves on the promise of intimacy.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
They sell you this idea of finding your person, finding your tribe, finding community. But the actual lived experience for the vast majority of people, it's just a transactional landscape.
It feels more like a relentless second job than a pathway to actual closeness.
Totally. And that fatigue isn't an accident. It's the direct, inevitable result of how these digital environments are fundamentally architected.
Right, the way they are built.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is a specific operating principle driving all this exhaustion. We can summarize in one phrase. Speed replaces judgment.
Oh, wow. Speed replaces judgment. That's spot on.
Yeah, think about the mechanical, physiological act of modern digital connection. You are sitting on your couch, right, at the end of a long day.
You're tired, you're looking at a glowing screen.
You're looking at a glowing screen, and on that screen is a heavily curated two-dimensional representation of a deeply complex human being.
A whole person with a lifetime of experiences, traumas, triumphs, all that nuance.
All of it. And you are forced by the literal design of the interface to evaluate that entire human life in a fraction of a second.
It's wild when you say it like that.
It is. You look at a cleverly angled photograph, you read a punchy, rehearsed 20-word biography, and your brain is just compelled to make this binary, instantaneous yes or no decision.
And when an environment dictates that speed has to replace thoughtful judgment like that,
Yeah,
it inevitably structurally rewards posturing.
100%. It doesn't reward the people who are the most genuine.
No, not at all. It doesn't reward the people who are emotionally available or capable of sustaining a healthy long-term dynamic. It overwhelmingly rewards the people who are just best at playing a role.
Right. The people who have completely mastered the art of the split-second advertisement.
Which fundamentally changes the way we view each other. Because honesty is inherently nuanced, and nuance takes time to read.
You simply cannot swipe on nuance.
You really can't. You can't communicate the quiet, steady loyalty of a person or the gentle way they handle conflict through a grid of 6 photos.
No, it's impossible. And because the platforms strip away the space for that kind of depth, people adapt by leaning on rehearsed scripts.
You see this constantly. You start to notice the exact same profile formats.
The exact same self-deprecating jokes.
Yes, the exact same poses at the exact same tourist landmarks. We are actively compressing the entire messy reality of our lived experiences into a flat, glossy advertisement.
And when you spend hours every week engaging with advertisements rather than human beings, it completely alters your psychological baseline.
It feels incredibly transactional.
Because at a neurochemical level, it mimics the exact experience of shopping.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
But human beings are not built to shop for other human beings.
Yeah.
Our brains are wired for slow, contextual, community-based bonding.
So when we apply a hyper-consumerist model to human intimacy, it completely short-circuits our empathetic responses.
We stop seeing the person on the screen as a vulnerable individual seeking connection.
And we start seeing them as a commodity to be consumed or discarded based on whatever mood we're in right then.
Exactly. And that commodification leads directly into a psychological phenomenon known as choice overload.
Choice overload. Let's unpack that a bit.
Well, it fundamentally breaks our ability to cultivate patience. Evolutionarily speaking, the human brain was not designed to process the existence of tens of thousands of potential mates within a 5-mile radius.
Right. For most of human history, our social circles were incredibly small, geographically bounded.
You knew the people in your village or maybe the neighboring towns. That was it.
And today, you hold a device in your hand that presents you with an illusion of infinite, frictionless choice.
And I use the word illusion very deliberately there.
Because while the volume of options is technically infinite, your actual capacity for genuine connection remains exactly the same.
Yes. Rather than making people feel abundant and secure, this endless parade of faces just creates a pervasive, nagging anxiety.
It installs this background hum in your mind, whispering that something slightly better is just one swipe away.
Someone who is just a little bit funnier.
Or slightly more traditionally attractive.
Hmm.
Or seemingly less complicated.
Just waiting right around the corner. And the consequence of that illusion is devastating to the actual work of relationship building.
Because when you believe that a flawless, effortless connection is perpetually waiting for you, you entirely lose the motivation to navigate friction.
You really do. The moment a conversation gets slightly difficult,
Or a misunderstanding arises.
or you discover a perfectly normal, manageable human flaw in the person you're dating, the temptation to just abandon ship becomes completely overwhelming.
Why would you put in the uncomfortable emotional labor of sitting down, having a difficult conversation, and working through it?
Exactly. Why do that when your phone is vibrating with the promise of 500 fresh, completely blank slates?
We just begin to treat human connections as entirely disposable, which is the exact psychological mechanism that has made ghosting and ambiguity the modern default setting for ending an interaction.
The transition toward ambiguity as a standard operating procedure carries a massive psychological toll that we rarely acknowledge in full.
People brush ghosting off as just a rude side effect of modern dating, a minor inconvenience.
But in reality, it is deeply destabilizing to the human nervous system. When silence and sudden disappearance become a standard form of rejection, it completely deprives people of closure.
And constructive feedback. In the past, within those smaller communities, if a connection didn't work out, there was usually a conversation.
Or at the very least, clear social signals mediated by mutual friends. You learn from the interaction.
Right, you learned maybe you needed to communicate your boundaries more clearly, or you just realized it was a fundamental mismatch of values.
But today, when someone simply vanishes into thin air mid-conversation,
Or after a handful of dates.
the person left behind is thrown into a psychological void known as ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss, that is such a powerful term.
Because the brain is a prediction machine. It craves narrative completion.
Right.
So when it is denied an ending, it turns inward.
The person left behind will obsessively replay every text message. They'll analyze every inflection from the last date.
They essentially cannibalize their own self-esteem, searching for the fatal flaw within themselves that caused the abandonment.
They internalize the silence as a profound judgment of their worth.
Instead of recognizing the stark reality, which is that the digital medium itself actively encourages and protects this cowardly, conflict-avoidant exit.
That constant threat of ambiguous loss creates a culture of extreme hypervigilance. Everyone is walking around terrified to be authentically vulnerable.
Because they've learned through painful repetition that vulnerability is frequently met with total disappearance.
Yeah. But there is another layer of anxiety layered on top of all this, especially for anyone looking to step outside the rigid boundaries of traditional monogamy.
Yes, this is huge.
When we look at why people feel so profoundly unsafe exploring ethical non-monogamy or alternative relationship styles, we have to talk about a phenomenon called context collapse.
Context collapse. This is a crucial concept to understand because it explains the sheer terror that prevents people from communicating honestly.
Absolutely. In our standard offline lives, we naturally and healthily compartmentalize our identities.
You have a specific professional self that you present to your colleagues and your manager.
Right. And you have a parental self that you present to the neighborhood PTA or the other parents at the playground.
And you have a deeply private, intimate sexual self.
And the sturdy walls between these different contexts are what keep us feeling socially and professionally safe.
But in the digital sphere, particularly on mainstream connection platforms, those protective walls instantly evaporate.
That is context collapse. It's the sudden, jarring, and often panic-inducing collision of those compartmentalized identities.
It is the profound anxiety of logging onto a platform, perhaps feeling brave enough to honestly explore A long-held desire.
or a non-traditional relationship dynamic.
Yeah. And then within 5 minutes of swiping, the face of your neighbor, your direct supervisor, or your child's pediatrician appears on the screen.
The physiological reaction to that moment is an immediate spike in cortisol. It is pure terror.
The terror of having your most private vulnerabilities exposed to the people who hold power or influence over your public, professional, or family life.
And the behavioral consequence of that panic is that it breeds an ecosystem of intense secrecy.
To protect themselves from context collapse, people retreat into the shadows.
They use fake names, they obscure their faces.
They crop their photos down to unidentifiable torsos.
Yes, and they refuse to link any verifying information.
And while that intense secrecy might successfully protect the individual from professional ruin or social judgment,
It completely poisons the well for the community as a whole.
it really does. Because anonymity is a double-edged sword. It might shield the vulnerable person, but it is the exact same shield that bad actors use to hide predatory, disrespectful, or abusive behavior.
When an entire ecosystem is forced to operate behind masks and fake names, vetting becomes structurally impossible. You simply cannot build genuine trust with a phantom.
You can't hold someone accountable for their actions if you don't even know their real name.
It creates a wildly unsafe environment where people are forced to take massive emotional and physical risks just to meet someone for a cup of coffee.
And even if someone manages to navigate that minefield, even if they bravely face the risk of context collapse and successfully vet an anonymous profile,
They almost immediately crash into another massive structural wall.
lifestyle fatigue.
Yes. There's a profound misconception that moving away from monogamy simplifies things by removing the pressure of finding the one.
In reality, exploring multiple connections, actively dating, constantly negotiating complex boundaries.
And just managing the sheer logistics of multiple overlapping relationships.
It requires an immense, often unmanageable amount of emotional and administrative labor. It's exhausting.
Lifestyle fatigue occurs because the social pace expected in these spaces is completely relentless.
When people first enter the ENM space, there's typically a rush of excitement, a powerful desire to experience everything they've previously denied themselves.
But managing multiple emotional connections, constantly engaging in high-level communication, processing your own inevitable insecurities.
Not to mention holding space for the complex emotions of multiple partners.
Right. It is literally a full-time job.
Without incredible discipline regarding pacing and rigorous, non-negotiable self-care, this relentless pursuit of novelty leads directly to severe emotional burnout.
People completely deplete their internal reserves because they have never been taught how to balance the thrill of exploration with the absolute necessity of rest.
Which brings us to a massive underlying societal tension that explains why all of this, the ghosting, the context collapse, the burnout, feels so incredibly confusing and difficult right now.
The 100-year shift. We are currently living right in the middle of a monumental 100-year shift in gender roles and societal expectations.
And because we are in the middle of it, we are essentially forced to live in two completely different time periods at once.
Think about the expectations we carry today. On one hand, we have a set of highly evolved modern ideals. We deeply want and expect total equality in our partnerships.
We demand a rigorous, enthusiastic consent culture.
We expect domestic labor and parenting to be shared equitably. And we require a level of deep, vulnerable, emotional openness from our partners that previous generations wouldn't even have possessed the vocabulary to articulate.
That is the modern egalitarian ideal we are all consciously striving to achieve.
But simultaneously, beneath the surface of those modern ideals, we're still deeply tethered to incredibly ancient instincts.
Heavy, ingrained generational conditioning. We carry the often invisible weight of centuries of patriarchal structures.
Despite our best conscious intentions, we repeatedly fall back into deeply gendered double standards, especially when we are under stress.
We still operate on the stubborn, outdated cultural script that dictates men must be the aggressive pursuers and providers of resources,
while women must act as the passive filters, the gatekeepers of intimacy, and the managers of everyone's emotional comfort.
Furthermore, there is still profound, lingering, internalized shame surrounding desire.
Particularly when it comes to female desire and autonomy. So you have this incredibly volatile situation, a conscious mind that wants modern ethical equality, trapped in a nervous system and a societal framework that defaults to ancient rigid hierarchies.
And then we take that immense, complex tug of war, all of that human nuance, all of that generational trauma and modern aspiration.
And we try to compress it into a tiny digital text box on a phone screen.
We compress it into an environment that, as we discussed, demands split-second binary decisions.
Under that specific kind of environmental pressure, the human brain panics and regresses. It simply cannot handle the complexity, so it looks for the easiest available shortcut.
And the easiest shortcuts are those old, narrow, two-dimensional stereotypes.
People are forced backward into behaviors they don't even consciously agree with, simply because nuance and vulnerability do not fit the medium.
That concept of regression is absolutely vital to understanding the reality of modern dating behaviors. When the environment is high speed and high stress, our cognitive load is maxed out.
So you have individuals who genuinely intellectually believe in modern equality suddenly acting out dating scripts from 50 years ago?
They revert to posturing, to aggressive pursuit, or to passive accommodation.
Because the platform itself doesn't provide the psychological safety or the spatial bandwidth to communicate their actual nuanced values.
This constant dissonance, the painful gap between the egalitarian values we consciously hold and the regressive behaviors the environment forces us to enact, is a massive driver of the widespread dissatisfaction we're seeing.
Knowing that this is the cultural water we are swimming in, we have to look incredibly closely at the actual behavioral patterns that are tripping us up every single day.
Time to audit the behavior.
Yes. We need a rigorous, completely honest reality check on the everyday missteps that cause so much unnecessary pain, particularly when people attempt to step outside the traditional relationship escalator.
And to do that effectively, we first have to fundamentally redefine ethical non-monogamy in very plain, unambiguous language.
Because the cultural myths surrounding it are wildly inaccurate and deeply harmful.
It is essential to provide a clear, functional definition. Ethical non-monogamy is not a free-for-all.
Not at all.
It is a highly structured relationship dynamic where absolutely everyone involved knows exactly what is happening. Everyone explicitly agrees to the parameters.
And this is the most critical, often overlooked component. Everyone has the complete, unmitigated freedom to say no or stop at any time.
Without facing any form of punishment, retaliation, or emotional guilt tripping.
It is an architecture built entirely on a foundation of radical transparency, ongoing communication, and enthusiastic consent.
I cannot emphasize enough how important that last point is. The ability to say no without facing retaliation.
Because understanding that completely obliterates the biggest, most pervasive cultural myth of all. The completely false idea that ENM is simply a socially acceptable loophole for cheating.
People who don't understand the dynamic frequently conflate the two.
Yeah.
And they could not be more fundamentally opposed.
Cheating, by its very nature, relies fundamentally on secrecy. It thrives on deception, on broken agreements, and on actively denying reality to your partner.
Cheating is ultimately about stripping away your partner's agency by refusing to give them the truth they need to make informed decisions about their own life and body.
ENM is the exact polar opposite. ENM relies heavily on bringing complex, sometimes difficult desires out of the shadows and into the light.
It is about establishing incredibly clear agreements that honor and protect everyone's agency and bodily autonomy.
Which leads directly to a very common and very dangerous behavioral pitfall that we observe constantly, the maturity trap.
Ah, yes, the maturity trap. Because ENM requires such a high degree of transparency and communication, there is a pervasive, arrogant assumption that simply making the intellectual decision to enter an ENM dynamic automatically grants you emotional maturity.
People read a book, they listen to a few concepts, and they think, I am open-minded enough to reject societal norms, therefore I must be a highly evolved, emotionally intelligent person.
But the reality is a harsh awakening. Simply deciding to change your relationship structure does not magically cure your deep-seated emotional blind spots.
In fact, if you do not actively, intentionally build a completely new set of relational skills, ENM will act as a massive magnifying glass.
It will drastically amplify your existing insecurities.
It will highlight every single flaw in your communication style, and it will violently trigger every avoidant, anxious, or disorganized attachment habit you currently possess.
It is the ultimate stress test for the human nervous system.
If a couple struggles to communicate clearly and resolve conflict effectively when it is just the two of them, adding third parties, new romantic energy, and complex scheduling is absolutely not going to fix that foundational communication gap.
It is going to take a small crack in the foundation and turn it into a massive sinkhole.
And this is exactly why we see such specific, repetitive, bad habits playing out in the real world.
When people lack the deep emotional skills required for this level of vulnerability, they fall back on those regressive societal scripts we discussed earlier.
One of the most glaring, universally recognizable examples of this is the pattern of status signaling over character.
The phenomenon of status signaling is a perfect case study of what happens when ancient evolutionary scripts collide violently with modern expectations.
When men are tasked with setting up a profile or deciding how to present themselves to potential partners, they very often default to displaying the specific markers that society has historically told them constitute male value.
They upload the picture of themselves leaning against an expensive motorbike.
They post the obligatory, dimly lit, shirtless mirror selfie from the gym.
They make sure the steering wheel of the luxury car or the face of the expensive watch is prominently featured in the frame.
They do this, often unconsciously, because they have been deeply conditioned to believe that their fundamental worth in the mating market is intrinsically, inextricably tied to their financial status.
Their physical dominance and their ability to acquire resources.
But the tragic disconnect, the reason this behavior causes so much friction and missed connection, is how that signaling is actually received on the other end.
Because while a man might post a photograph of his motorbike, genuinely believing he's broadcasting the message, I am successful, I am adventurous, and I am a capable provider.
The women viewing that profile are operating on a completely different frequency.
A woman looking at a potential connection is primarily, often subconsciously, scanning the environment for evidence of emotional safety and character.
When she looks at a profile and sees nothing but a relentless parade of status symbols, flexes, and attempts at physical dominance, she does not read it as appealing.
She reads it as performative pressure.
Exactly. It sends a very clear signal of an ego that requires a tremendous amount of external validation, an ego that might take up all the oxygen in the room.
It signals potential emotional unavailability.
Unless those external status symbols are heavily counterbalanced with genuine warmth, obvious self-awareness, and clear evidence of actual emotional maturity like a kind smile, a thoughtful prompt, or an ability to not take oneself too seriously, those flexes will backfire entirely.
They actively push away the exact kind of high-quality connection the person is hoping to attract. It is a profound, tragic miscommunication of intent.
They're broadcasting loudly on a frequency that the other person is actively trying to tune out.
And it is crucial to recognize that women fall into their own distinct, equally damaging behavioral traps, shaped by a different set of intense societal pressures.
We see this manifested constantly in what is known as the cool girl trap.
The cool girl trap.
From a very young age, women are heavily socialized to be endlessly accommodating, to be perceived as low maintenance, and above all else, to never be seen as a burden or difficult.
In the context of modern dating, or particularly when entering the sometimes intimidating space of ENM, this conditioning rears its head powerfully.
It manifests as a woman intentionally feigning being incredibly chill or overly flexible, simply to increase her chances of being chosen.
She will actively, consciously suppress her own internal boundaries.
She will ignore her nervous system's need for a slower pace, and she will silence her entirely valid desire for clarity and commitment, all to avoid the dreaded label of being demanding.
The cool girl trope is one of the most insidious and ultimately destructive patterns we see.
It is a woman who smiles and says, "Oh, whatever you want is completely fine with me. I have no expectations. I'm super chill," while internally her nervous system is in a state of absolute alarm.
Screaming for a clear plan, defined parameters, and basic emotional reassurance.
She makes a devastating internal calculation. She trades her own foundational comfort and safety for the mere proximity to someone else.
And the bitter, tragic irony of this behavior is that by suppressing her actual needs and faking a lack of boundaries, she is building the entire connection on a fundamentally false premise.
She is teaching the other person that she requires zero care or consideration.
And when that dynamic solidifies, it invariably leads to massive explosive resentment down the line, because it is impossible to sustain the performance of having no needs indefinitely.
If we zoom out from individual behaviors and look at the broader community dynamics that form around these lifestyles, we frequently observe another highly toxic behavioral pattern that damages the culture.
Gatekeeping without dignity.
Yes. This occurs frequently with event hosts, party organizers, or the administrators of exclusive community groups who decide to heavily filter their guests or members purely by an arbitrary standard of perceived physical attractiveness or social clout.
Now, to be clear, the act of curation itself is not inherently unethical. Organizers absolutely have the right to design their spaces and manage the vibe of their events.
But the destructive behavior lies in the execution. They implement this shallow hotness screening, and then rather than communicating like responsible adults, they simply completely ghost the individuals who do not pass the visual test.
They take the coward's way out and refuse to provide a clear, respectful, dignified no.
It is the velvet rope mentality of an exclusive nightclub, but stripped of even the most basic human courtesy. The sheer lack of a clear yes or no causes entirely unnecessary emotional harm.
It leaves people, often people who have put themselves in a highly vulnerable position by applying or reaching out, hanging in this agonizing, ambiguous void, wondering what is inherently wrong with them.
It is the ultimate manifestation of treating human beings as disposable inventory to be sorted and discarded, rather than as actual people deserving of basic respect.
And that specific behavior, the ghosting of applicants, stems from a much broader, deeply ingrained cultural inability to tolerate or handle friction.
We see overwhelmingly that adults today, despite their chronological age, treat any form of disagreement or boundary setting as a profound, life-threatening danger.
There's a profound observation regarding our current societal baseline of emotional regulation. When a conflict arises, when a misunderstanding occurs, or when a firm boundary needs to be asserted, people rarely possess the capacity to engage in a calm, grounded, adult negotiation.
Instead, their dysregulated nervous systems immediately interpret the interpersonal friction as an existential threat.
The primal fight, flight, or freeze responses completely hijack the prefrontal cortex.
As a result, they freeze and hide, or they take flight and vanish completely, which is the biological root of ghosting.
Or they go into fight mode and aggressively push past the boundary to regain a sense of control.
The fundamental capacity to sit calmly in the discomfort of a disagreement, to look at another person and say, I see this situation differently than you do, but I care about this connection, so let's figure this out together, is a critical life skill that is drastically, terrifyingly lacking in the general population.
And nowhere is that terrifying lack of emotional skill more visibly and destructively obvious than when established couples first make the decision to open up their relationship.
This brings us to a pattern we must address: the panic response in couples.
When a monogamous couple decides they want to explore ENM, they almost universally, categorically, vastly underestimate the sheer volume of emotional labor that will be required of them.
They sit down and they focus entirely on the logistics. They talk about scheduling dates, they talk about physical safety protocols, and they talk about rules. They treat it like a calendar management problem.
They hyper-focus on the surface mechanics of the transition and completely ignore the massive structural, emotional tectonic plates that are shifting violently beneath their feet.
In the beginning, there is often a surge of excitement, fueled by what the community calls new relationship energy, or NRE.
But when that initial intoxicating spark inevitably dims, when the NRE fades, or when the very first real, visceral flare of jealousy hits one of the partners, couples who lack emotional training tend to absolutely panic.
Their immediate, deeply ingrained behavioral pattern is to treat a perfectly natural dip in enthusiasm, or a sudden, understandable need to hit the pause button and recalibrate, as a catastrophic, fatal failure of the entire relationship.
They spiral immediately. They experience a moment of insecurity and think, oh no, I felt jealous, therefore we were fundamentally broken. ENM is actively destroying our marriage. We have made a terrible mistake, and we have to shut absolutely everything down immediately.
They view any form of emotional friction as a glaring sign of impending doom.
They fail to recognize that a moment of jealousy or a feeling of discomfort is not a failure at all. It is an incredible, profound opportunity.
It is an opportunity to repair, to actively reconnect with each other, to identify an unmet need, and to lovingly reset their boundaries.
But because they have never been handed the emotional toolkit required to navigate that friction, the panic takes the wheel.
And they often end up causing immense collateral damage to themselves and to the new people they have brought into their lives.
Which naturally raises the most important question of this entire conversation. If the cultural water we are swimming in is deeply toxic, and our default, unexamined behaviors are actively harming us and those around us, what does a functioning, healthy, sustainable alternative actually look like?
How do we actually build an environment that fosters genuine connection?
This brings us to the final phase of our analysis, auditing the solution.
And this is where we must examine the specific mechanics and the core philosophy of a community called the Blossom Society, and particularly their foundational operating principle, which is the concept that women are sovereign.
So what does a real solution look like in practice? Let's introduce the antidote to the chaos we've just spent time dissecting.
The Blossom Society, or TBS, is emphatically not just another app trying to game your dopamine receptors and get you to endlessly swipe.
It completely rejects that model.
Yeah.
It is fundamentally engineered from the ground up as a coaching-led, lifestyle-first membership community.
It is specifically designed for adults who desperately want genuine connection, who want intense chemistry, and who desire exploration and adventure, but who absolutely refuse to sacrifice their physical safety, their personal dignity, or their core values in the process of finding it.
The defining metric of success for the Blossom Society is completely inverted compared to the standard platforms that dominate the market.
Standard platforms, backed by massive venture capital, have a fiduciary duty to maximize user engagement, time on screen, and raw volume. They actively want you swiping as fast as possible for as long as possible.
TBS operates on a totally different paradigm. It does not attempt to maximize swipes, matches, or superficial interactions. It exists to maximize trust.
Every single mechanism within the platform, every user interface design choice, and every single community guideline is meticulously engineered to cultivate, protect, and verify trust between its members.
And the absolute core design principle that makes the cultivation of that deep trust possible is a bold, uncompromising statement that serves as the foundation of the community.
Women are sovereign in the garden.
We need to unpack this concept deeply because it is the beating heart of why this solution actually works where others fail.
Why make the deliberate choice to center women in this way? Why make female sovereignty the non-negotiable bedrock foundation of the entire architecture?
The decision to center female sovereignty comes down to a clear-eyed, pragmatic understanding of how social environments function in the real world.
Women's physical safety, women's agency, and women's overall psychological comfort are the ultimate, undeniable limiting factors in any lifestyle, dating, or ENM space.
Women are the canary in the coal mine for community health. If the women in a space do not feel unequivocally safe, if they feel harassed, if they feel pressured to move faster than they want to, or if they feel objectified and treated as commodities, they will simply close their accounts and leave.
And the historical precedent across countless platforms shows us that when the women leave, the entire community inevitably and rapidly collapses into a toxic wasteland.
Therefore, designing the architecture of the space so that women are sovereign is not an exercise in political ideology or virtue signaling. It is a fundamental requirement for basic ecosystem health and longevity.
I want to pause and clarify something incredibly important here because the phrase women are sovereign can sometimes trigger a defensive reaction or be fundamentally misunderstood by those hearing it for the first time.
This operating principle is absolutely not about putting men beneath women.
It is not about creating some sort of punitive, retaliatory, matriarchal hierarchy where men are treated poorly or their needs are ignored.
It is based on a foundational, universal safety principle found in engineering and risk management. You must always design the safety systems for the highest risk user.
In the context of heterosexual or mixed-gender intimacy, dating, and physical vulnerability, women carry the overwhelmingly highest physical, emotional, and societal risk.
When you build a social system where those highest risk members, the women, are empowered to confidently set the pace of the interaction, where they exert total control over the permissions of engagement, and where they feel entirely sovereign over their own lived experience, a remarkable counterintuitive thing happens.
The entire ecosystem does not become restrictive. It becomes significantly calmer, infinitely kinder, and drastically better for absolutely everyone involved, very much including the men.
That is the beautiful paradox of the system. When the members carrying the highest baseline of risk are finally able to relax their hypervigilance, the underlying simmering anxiety of the entire community drops precipitously.
Men no longer feel the pressure to aggressively pursue, and women no longer feel the need to constantly defend.
And how exactly does TBS achieve this environment of lowered anxiety? They do it by intentionally introducing a concept that goes against absolutely everything Silicon Valley has preached for the last 2 decades.
Friction as a feature.
Normal tech platforms are entirely reactive. They embrace the move fast and break things ethos. They remove all friction to onboarding, allow anyone to join instantly, and they only act after harm has already occurred.
They wait for a user to report harassment or abuse, and then eventually an algorithm might ban an account.
And by the time that reactive ban happens, the trauma has already been inflicted.
The damage to the victim's nervous system is already done, and the trust in the platform is broken.
Precisely. The reactive model accepts collateral damage as a cost of doing business. TBS completely rejects that.
They intentionally put substantial friction right at the front door to drastically reduce the likelihood of harm occurring in the first place.
They are intentionally, systematically slowing people down. This creates safety, accountability, and trust by design, rather than by accident.
Let's look at what that intentional friction actually looks like in practice, because it's fascinating. First of all, the community maintains strict, verified, adult-only access.
We are talking about rigorous, third-party age assurance technology to absolutely guarantee that every single member is 21 years of age or older. It is not a simple checkbox honor system. It is a hard gate.
Then there's the requirement of values-based onboarding. You cannot just download the app in a moment of boredom, create a blank profile, and start firing off messages in 3 seconds.
You are required to actively read, process, and engage with the core principles and behavioral expectations of the community.
Following the onboarding, there is the vital concept of graduated access. Unlike a standard app where a new user is instantly dropped into the general population, in TBS, you do not get full reach or visibility to the entire community on day one.
You have to demonstrably earn your access over time. This architectural choice acts as an incredibly effective filter.
It naturally weeds out the bad actors, the impulsively aggressive individuals, and those who are just looking for a quick, low-effort hit of external validation or an easy target.
If an individual lacks the basic patience and emotional regulation required to complete the educational onboarding process and earn their place, they are structurally, permanently prevented from interacting with the wider vulnerable community.
And of course, because human beings are inevitably messy, and because misunderstandings will always happen even in the best environments, friction will occasionally occur between members.
When it does, TBS employs a very specific, highly intentional moderation workflow, which they call pause, review, act, support.
I find this framework incredibly powerful because it is explicitly framed as active culture keeping, not merely punitive rule enforcement.
It is not a faceless, automated algorithm instantly deleting accounts without context. It is a nuanced, human-led process.
First, they pause the interaction to stop any immediate escalation.
Second, trained moderators review the full context of the situation, recognizing that human conflict is rarely black and white.
Third, they act appropriately based on the severity of the misstep.
And finally, and most critically, they actively support the members involved, offering guidance on how to communicate better moving forward.
It treats the community not as a database of users, but as a living, breathing garden that requires careful, continuous tending.
Which serves as the perfect transition into the overarching metaphor that TBS uses to brilliantly map the entire user journey: the garden.
Metaphors are incredibly powerful cognitive tools because they provide people with a shared, easily understood language to navigate highly complex social and psychological systems.
The garden framework is intentionally broken down into 4 distinct sequential spaces, each serving a highly specific psychological and educational purpose in the user's journey.
It's a brilliant way to visualize the journey. Let's walk through those 4 spaces. The very first space a new member enters is called the Vestibule.
This is the initial orientation space. Think of it like taking your shoes off, taking a deep breath, and centering yourself before walking into someone else's sanctuary.
This is the space where you explicitly set your intentions for joining, where you read and sign the comprehensive safety pledge, and where you carefully configure your privacy settings to match your comfort level.
You are actively preparing your mindset to enter a highly intentional space.
Once a member has successfully passed through the orientation of the vestibule, they transition into the second space, which is known as the tool shed.
The tool shed. This is the centralized learning hub of the community, and it is the physical embodiment of the core philosophy, growth before access.
This step is entirely non-negotiable. You cannot skip it.
While in the tool shed, members are required to complete a series of expertly designed coaching modules before they can unlock any further access to the community.
This mandatory education ensures that absolutely everyone walking into the wider social spaces shares a standardized, high-level baseline of emotional vocabulary, a deep understanding of enthusiastic consent, and a working knowledge of healthy relational mechanics.
Then, once you have put in the time and done the necessary work in the tool shed, your access expands, and you unlock the third space, the hive mind.
This is the actively moderated central community forum. You can think of it like the bustling village square.
It is a dynamic space dedicated to sharing collective wisdom, safely asking complex questions about relationship dynamics, seeking advice on specific situations, and actively rewarding the more experienced members who act as mentors.
It is the crucial space where the theoretical culture learned in the toolshed is visibly practiced, debated, and reinforced by the members themselves.
Finally, after the educational foundations have been solidly built and after a member's trustworthiness has been visibly earned through consistent, respectful, and constructive behavior within the hive mind, they unlock the ultimate space, the garden.
The garden. This is the wider, more expansive social environment where the actual broader connections, the private messaging, the dating, and the lifestyle explorations take place.
But here is the critical differentiator. Because every single person you encounter in the garden has already passed through the vestibule, completed the rigorous education in the toolshed, and demonstrated respectful engagement in the hive mind, the baseline caliber of interaction is entirely fundamentally different from the chaotic, unpredictable free-for-all of standard dating platforms.
The risk profile has been drastically lowered.
Having audited the structure of the solution, we really need to drill down into the granular mechanics of connection and examine what the lived experience is actually like for the people doing the work inside this garden.
We've repeatedly mentioned the toolshed and this foundational idea of growth before access. The specific coaching mechanic is the engine that makes this entire ecosystem function.
But before we detail the curriculum, we have to make a vital, incredibly important distinction regarding what this education actually is. TBS explicitly provides coaching. It absolutely does not provide therapy.
Drawing that line is a critical ethical boundary. Coaching and therapy are fundamentally different modalities.
Coaching is inherently forward-looking. It is about examining the present moment and building skills for the future. It is focused on teaching highly practical, actionable skills, providing concrete frameworks for better communication, and helping healthy individuals execute on their relational goals.
Therapy, conversely, is a clinical process primarily focused on treating diagnosable mental health conditions, unpacking deep-seated psychological trauma, and healing wounds from the past.
TBS is incredibly explicit and responsible in stating that they are providing education and practical tools for better connection, not clinical mental health treatment. They deeply understand their lane, and they strictly stay within it.
Absolutely. The clarity of that boundary is what makes the education so effective. So what exactly are the specific, tangible tools and frameworks that members are actually learning when they are in the toolshed?
These are the profound emotional skills that the vast majority of us were simply never taught in school, by our parents or by society at large. Let's start with a massive foundational concept: the difference between boundaries versus rules.
Understanding this critical distinction completely, irrevocably changes how you relate to every person in your life. Simply put, a boundary is a statement about what I will do to protect my own safety and energy. A rule is a demand I place on someone else's behavior in an attempt to control them.
The psychological difference between the two is profound and transformative. Let's look at an example. A rule sounds like this: you are absolutely not allowed to text any of your other partners after 9 p.m.
That statement is an attempt to control the actions of another autonomous adult. It is usually born out of the speaker's own unmanaged anxiety, and it inevitably breeds deep resentment, secrecy, and defiance.
A boundary, on the other hand, sounds like this: I need to protect my peace and get rest in the evenings, so I choose to turn my own phone off at 9 p.m. If you need to text others, that's fine, but I won't be available to respond or engage until the morning.
The boundary fiercely protects your own energy and limits without making any attempt whatsoever to control the other person's autonomy. Teaching people to shift their communication style from enforcing rigid rules to upholding personal boundaries completely de-escalates interpersonal conflict and fosters immense mutual respect.
And when we look at how couples operate, especially couples venturing into ENM, there is another rule that is taught, which is absolutely life-saving: the 2-yes principle.
When a couple is making decisions about exploring with others, engaging in a new dynamic, or setting a pace, this principle is ironclad. Both partners must offer a clear, enthusiastic yes for any action to move forward.
If you have a situation where one partner says yes, but the other partner says maybe, I'm not sure, or I guess so, that response is legally, emotionally, and functionally treated as a hard no for the time being.
This principle completely honors the pacing of the more hesitant partner. It structurally prevents the incredibly damaging dynamic where one person is dragged along into situations they aren't ready for simply out of guilt, pressure, or a fear of losing the relationship.
And because this lifestyle involves pushing boundaries and experiencing intense new things, inevitable emotional drops will occur, which is where the crucial concept of aftercare is introduced.
Aftercare is not just a buzzword. It is an essential, biologically necessary emotional and practical skill. After a deeply vulnerable emotional conversation, an intense physical encounter, or a highly challenging negotiation of boundaries, the human body experiences a massive drop in adrenaline, oxytocin, and other neurochemicals.
This drop can leave a person feeling suddenly depressed, anxious, or profoundly exposed. Aftercare is the intentional, structured process of checking in with each other, providing physical or emotional comfort, and actively restoring a sense of baseline safety to the nervous system.
It is the mature acknowledgement that deep connection requires immense energetic output, and we have a responsibility to help each other recharge and recalibrate.
And what happens when things inevitably go wrong? Because no matter how much coaching you have, we are all human beings, we all have bad days, and missteps will absolutely happen.
This brings us to the lost, profound art of repair. The vast majority of us were taught terrible habits regarding apologies. We were taught that if we mess up, we should just mumble a quick sorry, make an excuse, and try to sweep the incident under the rug as fast as possible.
Or worse, our egos flare up and we get incredibly defensive, saying things like, "I'm sorry you felt that way," which isn't an apology at all.
True repair is agonizingly uncomfortable for the ego. It is the highly structured art of explicitly naming the negative impact your specific actions had on the other person, taking absolute, unmitigated accountability for that impact without offering a single excuse, and then actively doing the work to restore the trust that was broken.
Repair is not just apologizing. It is the fundamental glue that keeps long-term relationships resilient in the face of inevitable failure.
Beyond repair, the curriculum also introduces members to much more advanced paradigm-shifting concepts, the most prominent being compersion.
Compersion is often described as the exact emotional opposite of jealousy. It is the learned ability to cultivate and genuinely feel a profound, positive sense of joy and warmth when you see your partner happy, fulfilled, and experiencing deep pleasure with someone else.
Achieving compersion is essentially the Everest of emotional regulation. It requires an immense, unshakable foundation of personal security and self-worth. It is not something that happens overnight, and it is entirely okay if it doesn't happen immediately, but it is a profoundly beautiful skill that can absolutely be nurtured, practiced, and developed over time through dedicated coaching and self-reflection.
So we have all these incredible transformative tools mapped out, but who is this entire ecosystem actually for? Let's ground this in reality by looking at the lived experience.
Let's paint a vivid picture of what this journey actually looks like for the real people utilizing the platform. Let's start by looking at the lived experience for single women.
For a single woman navigating modern dating, the promise of this environment is nothing short of revolutionary. She fundamentally does not have to trade her physical or emotional safety in exchange for exploring her desires.
Paint that picture clearly. A single woman makes the decision to join the community. She immediately enters the vestibule, where she is completely empowered to set her own pace. She decides exactly how visible she wants to be.
Because of the graduated access and the intentional friction, the moment her profile goes live, she's not immediately flooded with hundreds of low-effort, aggressive, or explicit messages from strangers. She isn't hunted or chased.
She has the breathing room to observe the culture. And when she does choose to interact, if she decides at any point that she feels overwhelmed or simply needs to pause the interaction, she can do so securely.
She can assert her boundary without the terrifying, deeply ingrained fear of triggering a barrage of retaliation, verbal abuse, or stalking that is so tragically common on unregulated platforms. She is firmly, unequivocally in the driver's seat of her own intimate experience.
It sounds so incredibly peaceful. It sounds like the way dating was always supposed to feel. Now, what about the experience for single men? Because this is a really important, often misunderstood demographic.
For the well-intentioned, decent, but perhaps underskilled man, this platform offers a learn-first journey that is incredibly valuable. Society has done a terrible job of teaching men how to navigate spaces of complex intimacy with grace.
In TBS, a single man finds a structured place to actually learn how to communicate and message with genuine respect. He receives the guidance needed to upgrade his profile, moving away from the defensive, status-signaling motorbike picture and instead learning how to project authentic warmth, emotional availability, and character.
And crucially, the system is designed so that he actively earns his access, his reach, and his reputation within the community through consistent, positive, respectful behavior. It is a system that finally tangibly rewards the good guys who are willing to do the work.
And finally, consider the immense value of this lived experience for couples. For a couple looking to expand their horizons, the platform provides a highly structured, expertly guided pathway to explore new connections without detonating their primary bond.
They're taught to utilize practical tools like the green, amber, and red pacing system to constantly check in with each other's nervous systems during new experiences.
If one partner hits an amber state, meaning they're feeling slightly anxious or unsure, the entire process immediately slows down to accommodate them.
They rigorously apply the repair rituals if a misstep or a misunderstanding occurs, ensuring that they stay deeply, securely connected to one another, even as they explore dynamic new connections with others. It completely transforms what is normally a chaotic, high-stakes gamble into a shared, intentional, and deeply bonding adventure.
Which ultimately brings us to a very practical, unavoidable reality that we have to address: the economics of trust. How exactly does an organization fund this high level of rigorous safeguarding, continuous coaching, and human-led moderation?
It requires a completely different financial model than the data mining operations of standard apps. It relies on transparent subscription pricing.
So realistically, we are looking at an investment of £12.99 a month for singles, £20.99 for couples, with a highly intentional free 3-month entry period specifically designed for verified single women, which further subsidizes and supports that crucial women are sovereign ecosystem we discussed earlier.
It's true that when people first hear about a subscription fee for connection, there is sometimes a knee-jerk hesitation, simply because we have been conditioned to expect these platforms to be free.
But we have to fundamentally reframe how we view this cost. As a society, people willingly, happily invest in minor conveniences on a daily basis. We pay exorbitant fees for food delivery because we are tired. We subscribe to half a dozen streaming services for entertainment, and we buy premium apps to track our sleep without a second thought.
Yet absurdly, we hesitate to invest a fraction of that amount into the emotional skills, the high community standards, and the actual tangible safety infrastructure that directly protects our most vulnerable, intimate, and important human connections.
The subscription model is the exact mechanism that makes this safety possible in the first place. Every ounce of that revenue goes directly to funding the rigorous human-led safeguarding, the continuous moderation, and the ongoing development of the coaching curriculum that keeps the garden healthy.
Exactly. When you subscribe, you are not paying for the superficial thrill of endless swipes. You are paying for the massive, invisible infrastructure that keeps you safe.
You are paying for the vigilant bouncer at the front door, the expert teacher in the classroom, and the dedicated gardener keeping the toxic weeds out of the soil. It is without question a profound investment in your own emotional peace of mind.
We have covered an absolutely incredible amount of ground today, analyzing the very fabric of how we relate to one another.
As we prepare to wrap up this comprehensive audit, let's distill everything we've unpacked into 3 clear, highly actionable takeaways that you can carry forward with you into your own life.
Takeaway number 1 is perhaps the most important paradigm shift. The reality of modern connection isn't broken because people are inherently malicious, flawed, or incapable of love.
It is broken because the dominant digital platforms we are forced to use actively structurally reward speed, superficial posturing, and endless volume over safety, patience, and genuine character. We are operating in environments meticulously designed for addictive engagement, not for sustainable human intimacy.
Takeaway number 2 focuses on the necessity of education. Entering into ethical non-monogamy, or frankly, attempting to navigate any intentional, healthy relationship structure, requires a completely new, rigorous toolkit of emotional skills.
Simply being curious or open-minded is absolutely not enough. Dedicated education is an absolute non-negotiable requirement. You have to actively learn and practice things like the 2 yes principle. You must deeply understand the profound difference between asserting true boundaries and enforcing controlling rules, and you have to master the agonizing but beautiful art of genuine repair.
And takeaway number 3 centers on the architecture of safety. When a social system or community is intentionally, unapologetically designed so that women are sovereign, meaning that women are empowered to set the pace, control the permissions of engagement, and have their physical and emotional safety prioritized as the baseline metric of success, the entire environment fundamentally shifts.
It doesn't become restrictive. It becomes significantly safer, dramatically calmer, and infinitely better for absolutely everyone involved.
So as we leave you today, I want to offer a final provocative thought for you to deeply mull over as you navigate your own life.
Look closely at your own relationships, whether they are romantic partnerships, platonic friendships, family dynamics, or professional ties. Ask yourself this question and demand absolute honesty from your answer.
Are the things I consistently call my boundaries actually just controlling rules that I'm trying to force onto others to manage my own unexamined anxiety? Or are they true internal boundaries that take responsibility for protecting my own peace and energy?
The answer to that single question changes the trajectory of every connection you will ever have. Thanks for listening to the Connection Audit, where we hopefully help you with the skills, standards, and the courage to be honest. And our only ask is, if you know one person who you feel would benefit from our conversation, please mention the Connection Audit and point them in our direction.
Until next time, less scrolling, more soul.